Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which unites over 365 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. We're delighted to join you every Tuesday morning at 10:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 AM. You can also watch live video of every show on our Facebook page at facebook.com/PPG Buffalo. Don't forget to follow PPG on Facebook and Twitter. And of course, you can always get great information on our website, ppgbuffalo.org. We recently also made this show a podcast, so you are able to get this show most likely the week after it airs on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you can get your usual podcasts. Our guest today is Dr. Monica Miles, co-founder and president and community collaboration coordinator for Mother Earth Literacies. She's here to discuss tree and foliage disparities on the east side of Buffalo. With the recent East Side Garden Walk and all of the summer activities we see around foliage in Buffalo, we're seeking to raise awareness about the historical context of, one, industrialization, but also the marginalization of natural and recreational resources on the east side particularly, but all over Western New York as well. So thank you so much for reaching out to us once again and taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it. If you just want to start introducing yourself, where you're from, and why you're so passionate about this, and maybe even a little bit about Mother Earth Literacies as well.
Absolutely. I'm just excited to be here today. As someone that has been born and raised in Buffalo, has gone through, Buffalo public schools, all the way to the finish line. I was at performing arts, and theater was my major. But I found myself at the college level where I was in STEM, or I was interested in STEM. And that wasn't something I probably would have recognized earlier. Mm-hmm. And I always had an affinity towards the environment.
Yeah.
However, when I was young, I had chronic issues with my asthma, allergies, and I was kind of like my mom's bubble kid, where I couldn't always go outside and play, or if they were cutting the grass, I had to stay indoors. All of that to say, I didn't have the language of environmental racism at the time, and recognizing that my environment has been constructed by individuals that made decisions that created my reality of having asthma. Yeah. So just because I didn't have the language at the time, I was still experiencing the impact. Kind of like fast forward, I find myself, my bachelor's and my master's are in geology. And I became a middle school science teacher. So I kind of fell in love with not just educating others, but then I started to wonder about education, which then ended up pulling me back into school. So I went to the University of Buffalo and finished up my PhD in the curriculum instruction and the learning sciences. And that's where I really learned more about equity and critical race theory, and how it went beyond just different interactions I was having with individuals, but how these things are constructed at a large societal level that influences the individual interactions people are having.
Wow.
From there, I was able to take my passion for science and take my passion for learning about learning context to really say, let's apply this to an environment. And typically in a research standpoint, because I'm also an assistant professor of engineering education at the University of Buffalo, and I'll be starting there in the fall. Yeah. I was able to take this curriculum focus, but then really thinking about how are people learning about their space from an environmental justice lens. And the more I learned about the environmental justice movement, it was actually just the regular civil rights movement in the beginning.
Right.
But the two kind of separated, where you have an environmental movement going in one direction, and it became predominantly white.
Yeah.
And then you have a racial justice movement going in the other direction, which is predominantly our people of color.
Wow.
And now when you look at those two movements, they don't readily recognize how they kind of go back together.
Yeah.
And the environment is literally the top killer of Black people.
Yeah.
And we lose kind of sight of that.
Yeah.
Of how environments are constructed to be unhealthy, unsafe, and that impacts the ways in which people live and unfortunately pass. And we have areas here in Buffalo where you can pull the data and the life expectancy is 64 years old.
Ooh.
That's 15 years less than the entire county.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of that to say, that's the passion for this work, is not only do we have these issues here, but finding ways to make a difference and using the skills and the knowledge I've learned along the way to basically use them for good. How can we use what we are and who we are and participate in a way that not only honors our identities, but is really making an impact on the collective good?
Yeah, and that's so interesting what you said about that split between kind of the civil rights and ecological justice, because a lot of the civil rights are about like park access or public pools, heat in the summertime, especially obviously with the roots of the civil rights movement being in the South. But nature and land is so integrated into the history of, one, our people, and two, our fight for our rights, whether it be our fight to be farmers. And we talked about that a little bit with Michigan Street Corridor a few weeks ago, about urban farming and Black agriculture and the history of that, and how we've kind of lost our connection to that with being in urban centers and different things of that nature. But I do find that ecological justice movements now are a little more white focused and target certain areas that they're familiar with, right? And do forget that area like the East Side or like a Riverside or like, and I think here a lot of the ecological justice is around our lakes and things like that, like water, which then once again only target certain communities that are more coastal in terms of proximity to the lakes and things like that. And even there's a little more work to do in which parts of the lake coast are being targeted and things like that. So I just love that you bring that up. I'm really interested in how you're connecting environmental justice with education, especially in terms of for youth, because you said you worked in as a middle school teacher, and things of that nature. So how important is that to include youth into conversations about environmental justice, especially within the Black community? Because I don't know if we always think about ecological justice first, because we think racial justice is a separate thing that we should think about first. But at the end of the day, everything's happening with global warming, and all these things affect us all. We see the smoke coming in from Canada right now, all of that. So how important is it to include youth on that conversation?
Honestly, we do not prioritize youth in the way that we should.
Yeah.
They have always been at the forefront of social movements, right? Literally, they will put their bodies on the ground for causes that they believe in.
Yeah.
And then how does that apply to the work? Yeah. And it's interesting because as we began to think about environmental justice from a research standpoint, it was the youth that made me realize if we connect how the environment is treated and how people are treated and show that relationship, and then asking them questions like, do you want clean air?
Yeah.
How do you know your air is clean?
Yeah.
How do you know your water is clean?
Yeah.
How much of this are we being too trustworthy?
Yeah.
Right? How are you going to investigate?
Yeah.
What I've learned is that kids, whenever we teach them about their local context, where they are, their own backyards, it doesn't matter what their race, age, gender, citizenship status, when we teach people about the local environment, they love it.
Yeah.
They love, especially little ones, they love to become know-it-alls about where they live.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I know what kind of tree that is.
Yeah.
I know what kind of squirrel that is.
Yeah.
Or we didn't start having black squirrels until they built the peace bridges and thinking like that, right? And so there's all these things that we have kind of pulled out of education. We try to quote unquote teach from a broad level, a high level, and that kids don't even understand literally the going outside and the things that they see around them.
Yeah, in their own backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and even in urban settings, right? So especially when we're increasing, so from a justice standpoint, looking at how space is constructed, we see that we do have the ability to create clean environments and healthy environments here in Buffalo.
Yeah.
But only certain individuals get access to that.
Yeah.
And then as we begin to think about integration, well, now you want to clean up this environment because it serves the needs and desires and the health and well-being of your white citizens, right? And so that's where when we're thinking about how our decisions are being made, how our resources being allocated, from a justice standpoint, if we're not teaching about environmental justice, especially within our K-12 spaces, especially with our teachers, right? So I believe the number is at least 70% of our educators do not reside in Buffalo. So they can go back home to healthy
community
environments. They're not worried about, are their children being exposed to lead? Right?
Yeah.
Do your children have equitable access to green space? Trees make us healthier. They make us happy.
Yeah.
They clean our air. They clean our soil.
Yeah.
Right? The list can go on and on.
Yeah.
And so that becomes that's not my problem. Right? That's not my problem.
Yeah.
And so in there, when we're thinking about the environment from a teacher preparation, teacher educator standpoint, it is a sense of privilege for you to now be raising your own awareness of how segregation has operated. So, right. So if you're thinking about, if you're driving from Williamsville coming in to teach our kiddos, you're not even fully being cognizant of how the environment is being reshaped right in front of your face.
Yeah. And I've met people from the suburbs that don't even know the landscape of Buffalo, don't even know how to get anywhere besides downtown. And so it's a little scary that they're the ones coming in and teaching in the community. And I think that's fine, but I do think there should be a base level of understanding and like immersion that everyone has to have in the inner city Buffalo community to understand, because we talked about, and you mentioned the lack of trees. And that's huge, right? Because everyone I know, if they want to go to the park, they're like, let's go meet at Delaware Park. Because it's the nicest park in the city. And there's other parks. There's a ton of parks. But if it's a sunny, hot day, you don't want to be at certain parks because there's no shade. And the other thing that I just was talking to, I think, Buffalo Pal about a few weeks ago, is how there's really no like safe recreational space for kids right now, and why that leads to increased level of violence or other things. And so when we talk about how ecological justice intersects into all these other different topics, part of it is there adequate public space in proximity to where people live in their neighborhood where they can just hang out or skateboard or learn a new hobby or do something that's outside. But the trash all over the parks, there's no shade, barely anywhere to sit except in the nicer parks, in the more, prioritized communities. And the lack of trees, that it just was so interesting to me when you reached out to me, because I've noticed that, but it's not something like you consciously think about. You're just like, dang, it's hot. There's no shade over here. Let's leave. Right. You just, like we talked about, kind of getting used to things before we started recording, and you just kind of get used to it. And you're like, I know I have to leave the east side to go find a shady, cool outdoor place to be. I mean, obviously MLK Park's a little bit of an exception. There's a lot of trees around there, but it's also like at any given weekend, there could be a million things going on at MLK Park. You might just want to chill or something. So I don't know if you have any more data or history about like the lack of trees on the east side, or kind of what are solutions to some of the tree issues we have. Like, what could the city or the county be doing to plant more trees or to prioritize trees? Like, what is the solution to something like that?
That's a really good question. And so I use in my, not just my research, but when I work with children, when I'm working with educators, when I'm working with community members, I'm using a tool that's called, I use two. EJ Screen, which is a tool by the EPA. It is pulling from government data. We can literally pull our own data, and it's easy to use to say, and to visually see, we don't have equitable access to green space. Okay. So EJ Screen is environmental justice screening. And it was designed for people to screen their environments. And you just go to epa.gov/EJ Screen and launch the tool. And you can literally put in the address and go forth. So that's one thing, right? So we have the data. Okay. Neighborhoods at Risk, which is run by Headwater Economics. So I try to use free, publicly available resources when working with community members, right? the reason that that's important is you should not need to be a GIS mapper to pull this information. However, these same individuals have created these tools to be user friendly and for us to pull our data. So from the Headwater economics data, we can literally go to different parcels on the east side and we could say this community lacks tree coverage, tree canopy by 98%. Right? And so when we're thinking about that, the lack of tree coverage disproportionately, by the way, creates a space where the environment on the east side, temperature-wise, can be anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees hotter just because it lacks tree coverage. Now we're thinking about your quality of life. Now we're thinking about, well, at some point, and people aren't talking about this one as much as we're thinking about this from a climate justice standpoint. If you now have an area that is trying to remain cool, right? So it doesn't matter where in Buffalo. So now we're just talking about people are just trying to stay cool because we're having an increased number of hot days. And we have the data that already shows us that. Even if we stop doing everything right now, the Industrial Revolution and what we have done thus far have done a lot of damage. And Mother Earth is in crisis. So all of that is like when we're thinking about your house being hotter, you're now trying to run AC or do whatever you can to cool. So you're going to run your AC, you're going to run your fans, you're going to be doing these things. That's going to increase the need for power. And we're going to start to, at some point, have power outages. Right? Power outages are dangerous, especially for vulnerable populations. If you are at home and your medication needs to be refrigerated. Or if you need any equipment that needs electricity. We saw that during the blizzard where people, it's not just your, it's the stress on your body throughout that time is being impacted. Just because we've created environments where it's uncomfortable, it takes you more energy, more stress, all of those things. So when we pull the data from EJ Screen, the east side of Buffalo, and there are parts of the west side also, and even some segments in South Buffalo, which that's if we do some racial solidarity work, I think we can really turn this thing around. We can map from government data low life expectancy. That means based on where you live, you're actually projected to live longer. Or in this case, less. Less, right? And so as we're thinking about that, less. Like
just based on where you live.
So our environments are constructed to kill us. Or make us healthy. Right? And that's not including any of the other health issues you might accumulate along the way, like asthma, cancer. Right? And so those lists can go on and on that stress and tax a community. And so as we're thinking about equity, folks have not thought about reparations and what does that mean in the climate justice movement, because you have poor, marginalized communities who have historically gotten the burden, right, from privileged environments. Yet they are the ones paying the cost. So the burden is the cost. Somebody has to pay the cost.
And it's a cost in so many ways. Like we've talked about health outcomes, like life expectancy. And then even with the power outages, before the power outage, when you're trying to run this AC in a non-energy efficient home, because we already know all of the homes in Buffalo the housing stock is ancient, 100 years old, 100 plus sometimes. Even the houses that are some of the capes on, the east side or Board or Cheektowaga built in the 50s and things like that. They're not even the most energy efficient. And let alone the landlord crisis and the state of the land and all those other things. But you're trying to run an AC unit. The other thing I talked about in a climate meeting the other day was, can you have an AC unit? Because do your windows open all the way? Do you have cross breeze? Do you have access to some of these things in your home? Is it efficient for you to even be living in? And until we look at the reality of the housing stock in these areas that already don't have trees, don't have the access to green space and things of that nature, we're really putting our communities at a very large deficit. for everything. So that's really, really tough. I want to plug something that I think is tangential to our conversation because I watched a documentary that I loved called Descendant. And it was a documentary about this place called Africa Town. And it's in Alabama. But essentially, it was a buzzworthy place because they can trace their ancestry straight back to Africa because they actually came from an illegal slave ship post-emancipation in about 1860 or so. So they know what country they're from. They still have colloquialism straight from motherland type of situation. But it was these slaves who came illegally, who were brought here, illegally, that were able to make their own homestead. And they made this place called Africa Town. Long story short, in retaliation of them making their own homestead, what they did was surround them with chemical, industrial, and metal factories. So they're surrounded 360 degrees by these factories that then poisoned their land, killed all of their trees, killed their crops. And then even though they're on water similar to us, their whole land was poisoned, right? And we've seen that. We've seen the PepsiCo thing. We've seen things like here happening like that in Western New York. And so I love that you're connecting kind of the DEI experience because I did part of what this documentary did was talk about, one, the racialized targeting of this community for this kind of environmental injustice that they put upon them. Not to mention their life expectancy is very low, one, because of the lack of green space and all of their crops, but also because of the exposure to the chemicals and things around them. Mm-hmm. I think it was 1 in 3 of their population have cancer right now, all of these different things. And do they have great medical care access? No. And they have to leave their area to go to, I think, Montgomery or one of the major metropolitan areas to even get medical care. And then that brings in transportation access. All these different issues that similarly we kind of have here. Mm-hmm. I've tried to go to the hospital in Buffalo and had to go to the suburbs because the wait here is 12 hours, but in the suburbs it's maybe 2 or 3. And so... And with our public transit the way it is, it's not necessarily the easiest to try and get other places. I say all that to say there's a really large, and I think the conversation we're having is there's a really large historical significance. And like you said, just tied to civil and just history of racism, civil rights and racism that impact our life expectancy, the places that we live, and even how we care about the places that we live. Because the other thing with us talking about green space that's very clean and things of that nature, I think the other thing I've seen in our community is that we don't necessarily care about the land around us because it hasn't really provided for us very, very well. And so you see a little bit more trash or not, people not cleaning up as much. And while we're changing a lot of those things with the grassroots gardens, different things that we have now, I'm hopeful because we have a lot of initiatives now trying to bring back together our community. And I know you have a lot of connections to those things.
I actually want to add to that, right?
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about, we have to be very careful about our language. Okay. And saying what our people care about or don't care about.
Okay, yeah.
Because you know why? Think about it.
Yeah.
If you go to, so let's say we're in Manhattan and we're walking the streets.
Right.
They have strategically placed trash receptacles, right?
Yeah.
If we go even to Delaware Park, there are strategically placed even bathrooms, right? So you have porta potties, you have access to bathrooms, you have access to, and someone is being tasked with going to clean those things up.
Yeah, the maintenance is there.
When you go to a lot of our spaces, where are the trash receptacles that are being collectively, routinely picked up?
Nowhere.
Right. And so, and people are, unfortunately, we are creatures of convenience, right? So if I'm getting ready to catch the bus and I just had my coffee and I don't have anywhere to put it. Yeah. It's not like when you get on the bus, there's a trash. Hey, let's reduce trash, effort. Yeah. It's going to wind up on the ground, which ultimately ends up impacting not just our sewer system. Yeah. It impacts what is in our water, because there are things that we put into our water, like plastic, that is not going, like microplastics is a thing. Yeah. Like we're damaging Mother Earth, but in the minoritized communities, how often you see a street sweeper go around? In Kenmore, they have one every week. Mm-hmm. Right? So does that mean that the white community is actually cleaner? Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean they're cleaning it.
No.
It does not mean they're
No.
They have systems in place to even address trash.
Yeah.
I would urge people, when you're seeing that even the greats are having trash on them, call 311.
Yeah.
They get less calls from the east side.
Yeah.
Flood them.
Yeah.
Because that is what we know that is what our white counterparts do. They will keep calling every day until they do something.
They use their systems.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to start using their systems. Yeah. And so in some of these things we can solve within our community ourselves, but again, our environment has been constructed to where those resources get allocated to the privileged environment. So now it looks like they really care and we don't. And we actually do.
Thank you so much for that correction.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, because there's never my intention to put the onus on our community. And I think we can do that to ourselves, right? Just like the way we have the language built around ourselves, and we internalize some of the language that's been brought upon us. And so I love that correction right there. And I hope community members that are listening can kind of reframe the way they think, and even then the way they speak. Because my mom's a pastor. So life is in the power of the tongue, right? That's what she always tells me. And so part of what we can do, and we do have the power to fix these things, but we have to challenge the powers that be. And I think we become complacent and kind of like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it, when there is. And so, like Monica said, call 311. Get it together. Call them. Where's my trash can? Block clubs. Even the GIS tool that you said that could be used. If you're trying to, even file a complaint or talk to the city about your neighborhood, use that tool, because it is public. And I want to thank you for making that exposed to the community and awareness there. Because there is more things that we can do about it. And I know there's a ton of community groups working on this, and they need that type of data, because unfortunately, when you try to use government and some of the systems, they want you to be a little bit more data oriented rather than storytelling, where we're kind of like, well, last week I was with my cousin in this, but there is data to back up your experience that you had, and we can marry those things and make, more permanent change. I can't believe the time went by this fast. So I think we're already done. But I want to once again thank you, Dr. Monica Miles, Mother Earth Literacies. They are a consulting firm. So if your organization, or if you're interested in the pedagogy or the consultancy and type of things that she's been speaking about, please reach out to them. I want to make sure everybody knows that this is a wonderful resource and really interesting new way to look at DEI for our community. So thank you once again so much for being here. This is Deja James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 365 organizations working to build a better Buffalo. It's the Public Good, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m.